Okay guys, this week I am here to save your life. And that sounds all a bit dramatic, but I'm gonna make what I think is the easiest, bang for buck, tastiest dinner that you could ever make. We make this at my house every winter, all the time. If you're not making this, you are really missing out. It's a Japanese style mille-feuille. So you probably got to the end of that little intro and I said Japanese style mille-feuille and you were, what? Huh? What was that? I get it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Mille-feuille, the French term for 1,000 leaves, doesn't really make sense in a savory Japanese context. You know, usually you'd see it applied to like a French dessert or something, but this is just a dish that is made of layers of pork and cabbage, and that's pretty much it. There's not much else that goes into this at all, and it is so delicious for so little effort. You really, really do have to get around it. So first, I've got some pork belly with the skin off and the bones off. I'm gonna need to cut that really, really thin. I've got some Chinese cabbage here, wombok, napa cabbage as you might call it, salt and pepper. That's pretty much the basis. I've got a few other things to go here as well. I'll explain those as I get to them. First things first, I need to chill the pork. Now in Japan, you can buy pork that's very thinly sliced. That's perfect for this dish. So it's literally just grab two things, put them together and you're done. But if you don't live near an Asian grocer, somewhere where you need to buy pork in a block like this, it's still really easy to make yourself. Just put the pork into the freezer for about an hour until it becomes firm, and then it's very easy to slice into thin strips. Of course, here's one I've had in the freezer for about an hour now. And you can see it's not frozen, like it's not solid, but it is very firm, and that's just right. See, it's still a bit floppy, but I'm gonna put my knife onto it. I'm gonna be able to cut some really easy thin strips. Sharp knife, partially frozen pork. You see how much easier that is? You know, if you didn't have the pork chilled down like this, to get it into a thin strip like that would be so much more difficult. You know, you'd be squashing the pork belly as we're trying to cut it, no matter how sharp your knife is. But an hour, no more, in the freezer, and this is what you get. It's really up to you how thin you cut it. This is about, I don't know, 1/2 centimeter. If you can go less than that, it's a little bit harder to do, but in Japan, you know, you're probably looking at it about 2 millimeters, a millimeter thick, so really, really very thin. I actually prefer it a little bit thicker, so 1/2 centimeter is perfect for me. And there are my thinly cut strips of pork. I'll just cut those in half. They're thawed out already. Put them back in there, and we'll move on to the rest of what we're doing. So now our Chinese cabbage, wombok or napa cabbage or bai tai if you're in China. I'm just gonna take the leaves off from this. Just leave them to one side. Just break them off as whole as you can get. You know, try not to break them up too much. Now I have washed this cabbage, but also it's good to check just on the inside here at the base if there's any kind of dirt in there that might have missed the washing process. Obviously you can see this one's pretty clean, so no need to wash it again. Now you can chuck away the core, but you don't need to throw away any of these scraps here. We'll use them to sit in the base of our pot when it's cooking. So now for our seasoning, it's just salt and ground white pepper. Give that a mix, that's it. So now let's start putting this together. Start with some of the larger leaves because they make a good base. And so now is how we build our layers. Just sort of flatten out the cabbage there. Doesn't matter if you crack it a bit. Just a couple of pieces of the pork on top of the cabbage. If you've got really thin pork, you can cover it more than I am doing right now, but really you don't want to over meatify this. It should be much more about the cabbage than it is about the pork. So if you're covering this entirely in pork, it's gonna be a little bit too meaty, a bit too heavy. A light seasoning with our salt and pepper, and another layer of cabbage. Now I like to make sure it's at 180 degrees to the previous leaf and around the other way. Otherwise it's gonna start to curl too much. It's gonna be too light on one side, too heavy on the other side. So make sure you're kind of opposing the leaves as they're going into the layers. A couple more pieces of pork on there, a bit more salt and pepper. As the leaves start to get a bit smaller, of course, you need to add more than one leaf to cover our bases. And then just continue along this process until you've got a nice big stack of pork and cabbage. Now I've left one big leaf for the end just to make it all a bit easier to hold together. And this is our giant stack of pork and cabbage. Now what am I gonna do with this, you might ask? That's not a silly question. I need to cut this into thirds. So try and just push it into a shape, use my knife. And this is why I've laid the strips of pork the same direction as the cabbage, so it's easy to cut through everything. And you want the thirds to be about the same width You need a sharp knife for this because you are cutting through pork as well. You don't want to tear everything there. So now all of this has to go into my pot. And I had kind of planned on putting it into this pot, but it looks like I've gotten a bit carried away. It's not quite gonna fit. So put that to one side, I'll grab a larger pot. And let's continue on. All of these kind of offcuts can just go into the base. And now try to pick this up kind of as one and lean it up against the side of the pot. Now, if you can, try and keep it standing as it is. If I'm gonna be completely honest, you don't need to make it look pretty like this because it's all gonna collapse in on itself in the style that I do it. There's lots of different ways of doing this. Some people put, say, stock in there and sort of boil it like a soup. I don't do that. I prefer to cook it quite dry and let the soup actually, or the stock, be made from what's in the pot. So both the pork and the cabbage are really rich in umami juices, and they'll come out into the pot and give you a really nice strong dressing that's gonna be lovely with this dish. I do add a couple of other things, like a little bit of salt just to go over the top, some sake just to stop it from burning the bottom. Totally not necessary. You can just put some water in, but I think just a couple of tablespoons of sake over the top is good. And then just for me, I throw in a couple of dried scallops as well, just because I really like the taste of them. So I sort of stick those in around where my pork is. And I think it just adds a little bit to the consistency and the flavor of the stock that'll collect in the bottom here. Other variations, you could add some grated ginger, you could add spring onions, you could add different leaves. You know, I've seen this done with green vegetables as well. Different meats, a Korean version of this uses very thinly sliced beef as well as pork. I like this because it's simple. It's 2 ingredients. It's pork and cabbage, and that's really all you need. The other stuff that we put in, the sake, the dried scallops, unnecessary. You can make this just with pork, cabbage, salt, and pepper. So, what do we do with this? Well, not a lot. Stick the lid on, put it on the stove at a low heat for about 1 hour. You don't want it to burn on the bottom. On a medium-low heat, it'll actually release juices faster than it'll burn on the bottom. And if you've got a nice heavy pot like this, it won't evaporate all that liquid away. So just throw it on the stove. Now, while that's going on the stove, I'll make the sauce that I like to serve this with. It's very, very simple. It's a Japanese sauce called Ponzu. It's basically just a vinegared or acidulated soy sauce. It's made from just 5 ingredients, and this is what they are. We've got about 75 mils of sake, 75 mils of mirin, half a teaspoon of sugar, some soy sauce, but I won't put that in just yet, and then our souring agent. So in Japan, one thing I really like to use is yuzu. Yuzu has the most amazing aroma. A lot of the rind of the yuzu has this lovely kind of winter citrus smell. These are off my own tree outside, and I know that these aren't very easy to come by, so I'm actually not going to use these today. If I was here at home and you guys weren't here with me, I would use them, but obviously the easiest substitute is lemon. No problems using lemon at all. I actually really like it with lemon. The yuzu is something just to keep in your mind if you ever come across it. You know, you can find yuzu juice in the shops sometimes, and you can use some yuzu juice plus a bit of vinegar because the juice doesn't tend to be quite as sour as it needs to be. But let's make this with lemon so you guys all know what I'm doing. First, I'll take the alcohols, I'll bring them to the boil over on the stove and just burn off a touch of that alcoholic taste in the mouth. Now, just burning off a little bit of that alcohol makes a real difference to it. It makes it a bit sweeter because you've got that sugar dissolved through it, but also that alcoholic burn that you get in your mouth is gone as well. So now straight in with the soy sauce. And you don't need to let this cool down to add the soy sauce. And then our lemon. Pour that through a sieve to get the seeds and pulp out. If you weren't fussy, you could easily just leave the seeds and pulp in there. There's no problem with that at all. Now just stir that lemon juice through. Give it a bit of a taste. It's pretty good, but it does actually need a little bit more sugar, so I add a touch more sugar to that. And that's our ponzu. That's really good. That touch of sort of sweet sourness is really gonna go well with the pork and cabbage. So with the ponzu now, that's way more than we need for this one dish. So it's great to just pour that into a jar keep it in the fridge, use a little bit for our mille-feuille now, and the rest of it when you make it the next time. And now here is what this looks like when it's finished. Obviously not quite as pretty as when it went in, but I can guarantee you this is absolutely delicious. One of the easiest meals you could ever make. Just serve it, just a little bit of the mille-feuille out onto a plate. And the best part is absolutely all of this liquid here at the bottom. Now remember, we didn't add any stock or other liquid other than a dash of sake to this. So all of these juices are just the juices that have come out of the cabbage and the pork. So you can imagine how delicious and flavorful these are. A couple of spoons of the juice and just such a simple dinner. Serve that with the ponzu and I guarantee you'll be happy. Pork and cabbage mille-feuille.